This is the Marriage Podcast, and I'm your host, Alexandra Stockwell. I'm a physician turned relationship and intimacy expert, and I specialize in showing couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships. I myself have been married for 25 years. My husband and I have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing relationship. If you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place because I will show you how. Let's dive in. Hey everyone, this is Alexandra, and it is my pleasure to bring back my husband, Rod Stockwell, to the Marriage Podcast. I got such wonderful feedback from many of you about how much you appreciated the episode we did together when we were celebrating our 25th wedding anniversary. That episode came out in March, and I've brought him back in honor of Father's Day. This episode will drop a few days after Father's Day in the United States. We're recording it a day before. I'm thinking about how to introduce you. I feel like in this context, your claim to fame is being my husband of 25 years, which that's a claim to fame, to be married for 25 years. But there is so much more to say about you. What would you like listeners to know?
Well, I guess one thing I want to say is that I have gone through a transition from being very career focused in my life to being very family and fatherhood focused. And just because now I feel so much clearer when I wake up in the morning that that's where my priority is and my heart is. And that wasn't always true in my life.
Well, that's amazing to hear. I haven't heard you articulate it quite like that. You've had such incredible success in your professional life. And I would say you have incredible success in your family life as well. So what instigated that pivot that you've just articulated?
Actually, probably there was the gradual part and then the sudden part. But I think the thing that instigated it was my fear of missing out. And I really did have the feeling, especially with our 2 older children, when they were growing up and I was working the long hours of a doctor, that I was missing out on too much of their life and their growth milestones. And I decided somewhere in my heart, I decided as soon as I could, I was going to change that so I could be more available as a father and as a husband.
Okay. On the one hand, I could hear that and think, oh, that's so obvious, and transition to one of my many other questions. But it actually isn't so obvious because we both know, and any listener probably knows, loads and loads and loads and loads of people who are focused on their professional successes and never quite make that pivot. So you say it was fear of missing out, but will you go deeper? Like, is there something you saw or an ache in your heart? I am definitely not giving you a multiple choice question, but I'm trying to point to something underneath, because fear of missing out is above the waterline. What's below the waterline in this experience?
It's been a while now. And so let me see if I can remember back. So here are some moments that come to mind. While I was in my residency training and I was working in the intensive care unit, spending every third night overnight in the hospital and coming home after having been awake for 24 to 36 hours. And my 2 young children at the time, I would walk in the door and they would want to play, and I could last about an hour. And then no matter what I did, I would fall asleep. It was the middle of the day for them, but it was time for me to catch up on sleep for me. And that was one of those situations where it was an involuntary experience. I couldn't push myself anymore. I couldn't try to make it work. Um, but work was definitely trumping home life in terms of what I felt I had to do and needed to do. And as my career went on, I had opportunities to adjust what my work schedule, and was moments like that that made it clear to me that less was better than more. Less work time in the week. And someone once said to me, no one ever on their deathbed wishes they worked an extra day of work or wishes they had more time working. And it never really, I didn't feel like I actually made the change fully until I started working part-time instead of full-time. And then I felt like, oh, now I am actually available more to my family in a way that I want to be. And then and then the outer matched the inner desire all the way.
Hearing you share that, I'm actually reminded of one of the concepts that one of our instructors in medical school taught us. He was somebody who you and I spent extra time with. He was a mentor to us, and he talked about the distinction between urgent things and important things. Because hearing you tell the story that you would last at most an hour playing with our little kids before falling asleep when you'd been up for 24 or 36 hours, knowing you were going in the next day to do another shift of the same length. What I was thinking to myself, as someone who also trained as a physician, is that if you were in the ICU and someone was urgently sick, you absolutely would have rallied and had another 4 hours in you or longer in the rush of adrenaline and the urgency of attending to a particular patient's needs, or they would suffer the most dramatic consequences. The thing is that everything in family life, when family life is wholesome and healthy and life affirming as ours is, it's not urgent, but it's very, very important. And there's something about having the reserves to respond to everyday experiences without needing the intensity of literally life and death and adrenaline creating activities in order to be present. So I really love that you've said that. And I guess I want to just layer into our conversation of three different things. One is this study that I came across recently, which shocked me and makes sense. It's that 81% of fathers questioned in some survey, thousands and thousands of fathers were questioned. They agreed that men generally perform better as fathers if they are married to the mothers of their children. And I think I was impacted by that because in my own experience and the experience of many others I know, as children, whether young, adolescent, or adults, it can feel like our relationship with our father is a thing unto its own. But this study points to how much it really is in the context of the other relationships, particularly the one with the mother of the children. So that's one thing I want to layer in. The other thing I want to layer in is that so often in my work, one of the biggest problems is that couples are parents. They're fully attending to their children, and the erotic energy and the flirtation and the you as a man and me as a woman energy just is way in the background. So, one of the things I also want to talk about today is your perspective on how you are such a remarkable, devoted father. And somehow that is not instead of being an attentive, responsive man in my life.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And it really goes back to what you said before about urgent things driving what happens versus important things driving what happens. And the way that I experience it is if there's if the urgent things are crowding my time out and filling up 80-90% of my time and attention and the week, then i'm not going to I'm not set up for success in doing a great job with all the important things. But when I can squeeze down the amount of time to 50-60% for the urgent things, then there's all this room, emotional room and room in the week for the important things. And then I get to have my inner impulses and my inner desire of I want to be honoring you and us and our time and not just be only focusing on the children, but also time with the children can turn into this urgent thing. And it's much better if I'm coming at it as this is important, this is what I want to be doing. And I think I show up better as a father when I am doing that too.
I definitely agree with that. Will you be specific in terms of what are the kinds of things that are urgent that used to be 80-90% of your time and are now 50-60? I mean, is it just work that you're putting in that category, or what else goes in that category? So we can be really specific. And again, what's in the important category besides me?
Yeah, let's so I want to start the other way and just say, what's an example of something that's important? Okay, let's say that you have a birthday coming up,
Oh, and I do.
for example, and I it would be my custom and my pleasure to get a gift for you. So if it's an urgent situation, then it's going to occur to me a week ahead of time or 2 days ahead of time. And I'm going to feel like I'm scrambling to do something that's good enough. As opposed to if it's important and I have the space to consider important things, then a month ahead of time, I'm thinking, oh, Alexandra has a birthday coming up. I want to think about what would she really enjoy and what would honor her. And I can look at you and at moments we have together, and they'll give me little hints of where you are now in your life and what would be good for you. And there's this whole process that of noticing and attending to you and taking a moment in the evening to think about what I would get or what I would order or whatever, that is all lost at the point that it's urgent. And then the honoring of your birthday becomes much more hollow than when I can put all that attention into it. And it might be the same amount of time attention, but it's much more leisurely attention that results in a better outcome.
Okay, that is such a beautiful description. When my birthday comes in 2 days, June 21st, I fully intend to have this in mind and savor it. And I'm sure I'll feel it, because on the receiving end, unless in the urgent times you happen to have a brilliant inspiration, it feels different at this end too. So I think that's a magnificent description. And I want to go a little further on, like, what would you say about navigating being full on in the parenting role, in the fatherhood role? I mean, we have a 9-year-old and we have been parents for 24 years. So that's a long time being devoted to being a good father. And yet, here we are with a juicy, passionate, flirtatious relationship. What would you say about how we it's not even that we have a foot in each camp or we straddle it. There's a way with us that it's all part and parcel of the same essence. How would you describe that? Because it's not a conflict.
When you were talking about that study, what I was thinking about is how our being married has allowed me to have a lot of different relationships to our children and you also, but let's just talk about the fatherhood part for a second. And that's all been fine and good and part of the rhythm. And there were phases when you mostly cooked breakfast, and there were phases when I mostly cooked breakfast, and there were phases when you were the one who were taking the children, driving them around to places, and there were phases when I was available and I was taking the children around to places. And I think if we weren't married and we didn't have our context, then it would have been easy to be judgmental and say, well, some of those times I was being a good father and some of those times I wasn't being a good father. But in the context of our marriage, and our marriage providing the context, the environment, the space for parenting our children, we could juggle things back and forth, and exactly what my role was can shift over time, but we can still make sure that everything that they need gets attended to. So one element of why I'm glad that we are married and have been married this whole time that we've been parenting is because it provided a way for us to rewrite our exact roles in relation to taking care of the children and have it all be part of doing what we do to take care of them.
Okay, great. I understand that. I'm going to add some words in case people listening are wondering, like, it's often good to share some specifics. So to be really specific, I think that if I'm traveling for my work and I'm out of town for 2 weeks, or I am full time with the children because you're working 100 hours and have preparation to do when you're awake at home for a presentation, any variation of that, or if I'm working 3 days and you're working 3 days, or any which way that that's arranged, we both consider you a fully involved father and me a fully involved mother. And it is very easy, I say that because I see it so often, to think that if a father isn't doing all kinds of things, he's not really involved. Like, let me give another specific example of this. So for the people that I know, when having a first baby, the idea in a modern egalitarian marriage is that since the mother is nursing, the father should be the one getting up to change the diapers in the night. It's just understood that is the proper way for any modern Western couple to handle this. Anything else is an inappropriate imbalance. Well, we never did that. Why did we never do that? Because when our first child was born, you were a third-year medical student. And even though I had a new baby who was not sleeping through the night, all the things that come with having a new baby, I knew that I was getting more rest than you were. And it was of absolutely no benefit to anybody, including me, for you to be getting up at night changing diapers, because it just meant you would be like, it just wasn't the thing. And so I knew that your contribution to our family was to focus on success as a third-year medical student. And my contribution was to get up and change the diapers as well as everything else I was doing. And I didn't have any resentment about it because the whole thing was so collaborative. So this conversation would be, yes.
And to talk about the other half, which is how do we be parents but still honor our relationship? For me, it's really about having that be front and center, having that be a goal, because
having our relationship be
having our
center.
yeah. Don't forget that we're married. Like, going to bed, I have my little checklist of things to remember for the morning, and one of the things is don't forget that I'm married to Alexandra.
Are you making a joke or are you being serious?
I'm making a joke, but
because you've had checklists in your life.
I never actually did that, but I should have. The point is that as soon as I would take for granted our marriage and not give it attention, it would like start to wither or something. Like it needs ongoing attention regularly, and every day, every opportunity. And it's the way that we can have the hotness just across the table from each other is because both of us are thinking about our whole self and not just thinking about what the children need next or something else. So I still think it's 80% an inside mental job and 20% outwardly the things that we do to cultivate our marriage.
Yeah, because honestly, I think we have a lot to learn from Jane Austen and Victorian times, or at least that's been the context of inspiration for me, because I think it's possible to say, would you please pass the salt, and have it mean some things I would never explicitly articulate at the dinner table in front of my children. Like, I really think that all contexts and all communications can carry all kinds of messages that aren't necessarily apparent to all listeners. I have called this discrete eroticism. And I think we have a lot of discrete eroticism going where we can make any interaction seem perfectly appropriate. That, again, I hear many women say that my children are the most important thing in my life. And it's just clear that there's some kind of societal meme that we prioritize our children and then our husbands come after that, or our partners, whatever gender they are. And I did that when we had our first child and first children. I mean, not entirely, but that was something that an energy in my soul. And at some point, I just shed it. And
doesn't work as well.
It doesn't work as well. Well, let's be honest. I need to be the most important thing in my life, and you need to be the most important thing in your life. And we both did a lot of work to make that be true. And then one another becomes the second most important thing in our lives. And then the children come after that. And the thing is that having the children be third after me and us, or you and us, having them be third actually has them be more central and more nourished and more honored and more celebrated. Maybe that's another episode to talk about parenting, but I think it's really related to who you are as a father. But I feel like the conversation.
Wait, there's one other thing I want to add in.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So in terms of like an exercise, what I think, what just occurred to me is about, okay, so the children are in bed and it's just the two of us. What do we do first? And one of the best exercises that we have done and often do together is just to kind of clear the air. Like, you say all the things that are on your mind and that are weighing on you, and I say all the things that I'm thinking about, and all the unsaid stuff that I wasn't going to say in front of the children, all that. And once we get all that out, then there's this much bigger emotional room to be intimate and actually connected to each other. But I feel like that's such a helpful way of just like clearing the fog that's in the way of the two of us connecting as husband and wife.
Okay. It's so fun to hear you say that, because I definitely coach couples to do this often. I describe how at 9:00, you and I connect. One of us comes to find the other, and we connect. And there's some nights when the connection consists of, "Hi, sweetheart. How are you? You say, it's been a long day. I say, me too. We may kiss, and that's it. And then there are other times when we connect, and it's more like what you've just described, where there's some kind of resentment or details or residue that's built up, or there's a conversation that we couldn't complete because a child arrived on the scene and we weren't going to proceed with the child present, and we have it. And then there are times when we connect and there aren't words spoken because all of the communication happens with our bodies. And I think it's actually wonderful to know that if you make it a daily practice to connect, for us, it's at 9 o'clock, you can actually drop in and connect very quickly. It's not this whole long, drawn out thing. It can sometimes take 5 minutes, and sometimes it's wonderful when it's 2 hours, but there's a regularity in doing that every day, which just colors the rest of our waking hours with a lovely harmonizing cue.
Yeah. And I guess what I was thinking about is if it's feeling hard to connect or difficult to connect, it can be because there's that residue of something that needs to be moved aside, and then it's easier to connect.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to emphasize for anyone listening that it's actually, this is a good example of urgent versus important. So if you're having difficulty connecting because there's a bunch of stuff that has been unsaid by one or both of you, then it's urgent to connect. But I highly encourage couples to connect on a regular basis in a way that has it be important, and you get in the practice of connecting that way, and not only use it when there's an issue that needs resolution. And I describe it as our connecting at 9 o'clock every evening, but I know couples who do it 3 times a week, once a week. It doesn't really, I mean, it depends on what kind of phase you're in your relationship, if once a week is frequent enough. But the point is that you can create this in a way that works for you and doesn't create time pressure, and instead becomes this way, like you eat regularly, you interact with your children regularly, you go to work regularly, and not just by default, but with intentionality, you connect with your partner regularly as well. But this conversation, it's really opened up so many things, and I want to have more conversations, follow the threads another time, but I feel like the whole thing would be incomplete if we didn't also mention, we haven't talked about this in years. I don't even know if you remember it, but there were times when you were jealous of our children because I spent so much time and attention and was in physical contact with them. And I think you were jealous that you didn't get to have that too, which you have addressed in terms of the fear of missing out and everything else you said. But also, you were jealous of my attention. I know this hasn't been true for so many years, but it was true 20 years ago. Do you have anything you want to say about that phase as it pertains to having been an important moment in our journey that got us to where we are now?
Wow, it's like flipping back through the pages of the book and seeing how I looked with a beard.
Which is really funny because you've been clean shaven for 20 years.
Yeah, I guess if I look back on those times now, I would say that it's a symptom of our not putting enough attention on our connection in general, and that those feelings that were arising in me were because I felt like I had a desire for me to be feeling more of your attention on me. And I didn't at the time really necessarily know how to act on that desire, or that it was okay to feel that way, or any of that stuff. But looking back from how far we've come since then, I would just say that having those feelings arising, it's probably a natural consequence of me or both of us, needing to put more attention on our marriage.
Oh my gosh. And hearing you say all that, I'm remembering my side where I would be taking care of children and working all day and feel like putting attention on you was just another thing on my to-do list. And
Right.
it wasn't something that was generative enough for me to look forward to it. It definitely was kind of an investment in the long-term future, not in the short-term joy, which leads me actually to want to mention the Aligned and Hot Marriage program, my signature program, because all of the things that you and I learned to do with one another so that these issues, which I wanted to bring up because I know that so many people experience them, but they really like we can't even smell them. We have to like, it's almost like an academic remembering because there are none of these feelings in our souls now, but to remember when you were jealous and I felt like putting attention into our marriage was this additional duty at the end of a long day. And even when I did, like, we didn't know how to be with one another in a way that was exciting and nourishing and compassionate, and you accepting you and me accepting you and me accepting me and you accepting me. Like, all of that was something that we learned. And I have taken all of those years of experience and really created a fairly easy to follow manual, which I say because you used to
I
always
love
say,
manuals.
yeah, like, where's the manual for marriage? Where's the manual for how we relate? So I've created that. It's in the Aligned and Hot Marriage program. Although, let me say, there's lots of stories and very specific, fun exercises to do with your partner. So if you're listening and you're a parent and you're married to someone who is parenting your children, whether they're a biological parent or not, is really not the point in this conversation. But if you and your romantic partner are parenting together and you want more for one another in the parenting and more for one another in the passion between you and the depth of connection, please check out the Aligned and Hot Marriage program because it really will give you what you need to create it. In fact, there's a woman who enrolled in the program last fall. She and her husband went through the modules, and she let me know 6 months later two things. One is that when she became a mother, she was just amazed at how much love she felt for her children. And as a result of going through the Aligned and Hot Marriage program, she was equally amazed at how much love there was in their marriage. We're looking at one another here, but that's not audible. We'll put words to what you're feeling right now.
Well, I remember the angst that went with you, my husband, are just another to-do list item for me, and you're not at the top of the list. And my looking at you and how that did not sound like a fun way to be attended to anyway, and feeling like there was no solution to that. That I remember, it's a while ago, but I remember that stuck place and like seeing the problem and feeling like there was just no way out of it. And
now we can barely remember it.
Now I can, yeah, but it took so much work on our part, and it's just such a pleasure to be able to simplify that process for other people, with this kind of program. It just is so amazing that it's available now.
Yeah, right. Like, what took us 15, 20 years, this couple went through this 8-week program I've created. And this is what she said, that she was amazed by how much love there was possible in their marriage. And the other thing that
it never would have occurred to me back then that there was just something I didn't know how to do. And once I learned how to do it, I would be in such a better place, and we would be in such a better place.
It's so funny to hear you say that, because I say often that having a fantastic relationship is a learnable skill. And the problem is not having the education. It's the thing that motivates me to create all of the programs that I create. It's education so that people can have a fantastic relationship, because that is a learnable skill. And the other thing that this woman said, her children, when they went through the program, were 6 and 4. And she said in the 5 or 6 months since completing the program, they had more intimacy, more passion, more bedroom connection than they had in the 6 years since becoming parents, because navigating being a parent and being a romantic partner, it's so tricky, but it doesn't need to be. So
it's really good to have an aligned marriage, but I really like a hot marriage.
well, the fact is that the program is called the Aligned and Hot Marriage because with the alignment comes the heat.
Absolutely.
Okay, so with this celebratory conversation, I want to, I guess, for the first time this year, wish you a happy Father's Day.
Thank you.
And I'd love to hear what's on the horizon. What do you look forward to in terms of new experiences or something to cultivate in yourself in terms of being a father?
You know, I feel so good about how I'm showing up as a father for each of my children now. But I have to admit that the thing that would be on the horizon is wondering what it's going to be like to be a grandfather someday, and living into, oh, there's a whole other dimension of fatherness out there for me eventually.
Right. And in that, do you think of being a grandfather to the children not yet even on the way? Or do you think of being a grandfather in the sense of a completely new parenting role towards your children, or both?
Oh, I was thinking of it in terms of the children not yet on the way. But being a parent never ends. And that has been clear because my children, as soon as I get comfortable parenting them at whatever age they're at, then they get a year older. And then there's the chance to meet them where they are in a new place. So that will be an incredible adventure to parent them as parents of their own children.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Marriage Podcast. Please rate and review the show on iTunes. It really makes a difference. And if you have a question or a comment, reach out to me via my website at alexandrastockwell.com.